Good morning, Dave Angerinos. I got a special one for you. I know I always say that, but this is something different. I'm talking to somebody that is technically in the future right now, one day in the future. I found him from the Cartoonist Kayfabe channel. He is a kindred spirit, somebody that hunts books and sells books, but over in Japan. And that is Japan book hunter Koenji Sean. Let's say hello to Sean. Hey, Sean.
Hey guys, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. It's 8 a.m. here in Tokyo, and I'm here at the office with all the books.
All the books. Yeah, you're in the Koenji. Is it an area? Is it a neighborhood or is it a specific town?
It's a little neighborhood west of Tokyo. It's a couple stations away from Shinjuku, Shinjuku is of course central Tokyo, and we're here on the west side. And I'm one station away from Nakano Broadway, where of course the original Mandarake shop is. So it's a convenient area for book hunting in that regards. And also West Tokyo has so many just small mom and pop bookstores. So kind of gravitated over this way, found this neighborhood, love it. And I've been in this neighborhood for 11 years and I've been in Tokyo for 20.
Wow. That's I'm amazed at all of that, especially with the fact that there's so many little businesses in one of the biggest cities in the entire world. Um, so that's yeah, I'm excited to dive into that. But before we get started, you're Washingtonian, right?
Yes, I'm from Seattle originally. Seattle, Spokane, Seattle, back and forth,
Yeah.
But yeah, I graduated from the University of Washington, came over for a study abroad for a year, and that year turned into 20.
That's and it happens. And you hear a lot of people that do that. So in Washington growing up, I wouldn't even ask about American comics. What's your first experience with manga?
Actually, my first experience with Japan was skateboarding. I grew up skateboarding, and I met a couple of foreign exchange students, Japanese kids, and we started skateboarding together. And that got me interested in Japanese stuff and, watching Japanese anime and then starting to get into manga a little bit, And then I had this bright idea that I would, in university, of course, you have to study a foreign language. And I was like,
Sure.
oh, I have Japanese friends. I'll just study Japanese. It'll be easy. Little did I know it's not that easy. And then it took me on this journey. And it really was kind of like little bits of Japanese culture here and there. And then in the journey to learn Japanese, I picked up manga.
Right. That makes sense. And growing up in Seattle and being in Seattle in your college years, you've got the International District, and Wajimaya I assume was around then.
Yeah, Wajimaya was around then. Kinokuniya.
Yeah. So you had a really great place to kind of entrench yourself in that culture.
Yeah, and the used bookstores around the University of Washington, foreign exchange students would sell their old Japanese books and their old shonen jumps and stuff that they had brought from Japan, and I would pick them up for $1, $2, and peruse through them and dream that one day my Japanese would be good enough to actually be able to read them, and eventually that did happen.
I definitely had one when I was a kid, and I have no clue how I got it because it wasn't never in my radar. But when I, first started getting back or getting into international books, I'm like Shonen Jump. I had one of those. I had at least one of them because I could vividly remember how thick they were. They're like mini phone books full of comics.
Yeah, and one thing that I'll tell people, they're meant to be just read on the train or read, on a break and thrown away. So in our neighborhood here, Thursday morning is paper and magazine and book pickup morning. And if you go around the neighborhood on a Wednesday night, you'll see stacks of Shonen Jump and Sunday just sitting out for the recyclers to come and pick up on the Thursday mornings,
Wow. That's mind-blowing. And I definitely want to hear you speak upon it. The comics culture in Japan is there's nothing else like it in the world. I mean, it makes the US look like a tiny dwarf, and it probably makes France look like a dwarf too. How much of culture in Japan is centered around comics and manga?
I mean, I went and watched the new Spy Family
Mhm.
Code White movie with my family. All
Okay.
6 of us got together and went to the movie theater together. And I was looking in the movie theater at all the people watching, and of course it's based on the manga.
Yeah.
And you have all kinds of, it's not just kids, you know, you have kids, you had couples, you had just people that just by themselves going into the theater.
Mhm.
So if you think about it like that, I mean, just a large part of Japanese culture is centered around or based off of comics. And even if you ask someone like, do you read manga?
Mhm.
They might say like, oh no, because they don't think of themselves as an otaku.
Sure.
But then you find out later that they read only cooking manga, or they read only like war manga, or you know, like they have this like little niche that they're into, but they don't read manga per se. But
It's interesting too because it seems that Japan and storytelling, you can find every type of story told through manga, whereas here you can't. Like maybe in the 50s and the 60s, you know, with romance, war, horror, sci-fi, but that's all gone now. It's just superheroes and then indie. And it's one of those things that fascinates me by the culture of comics and manga there.
that is one thing that kind of drew me into manga was
Mhm.
I started off reading like really simple things, Doraemon, Sazai-san, like stuff that I could like actually read and
Mhm.
understand, improve my Japanese. And then as I got deeper and deeper into it, I found that there's just so many niches and
Yeah.
so many different kinds of manga out there that I just didn't know about, you know. Of course, I knew about like the Devilman and the
Mhm.
Akira and all
Mhm.
the big titles and the big names when I was younger. But then, you know, as I started collecting and I started really getting into it, then you find just all this like little niche stuff. And there is
Right.
really a niche for everyone. And
Yeah.
that's why you have Comedia, Comic Cat, all these like conventions just full of dojinshi and like self-publishing, you know, people self-publishing.
Yeah.
And everyone has their own little niche.
Yeah, yeah, and that's the one thing that, you know, Ed, on kayfabe has really kind of dove into is the niche of how deep it goes. And I do wanna talk about that a bit. I do wanna ask you because it's one of your, older YouTube videos, you talked about reading, Zap and Heavy Metal and Mad Magazine growing up. It's kind of a two-part question. Who are your favorite artists to come out of that? And then is there anybody that you can be like, "Oh, I was a big Crumb fan, so I read a lot of this mangaka." Is there anybody comparable on those favorite artists that
Well,
you grew up?
now that you mentioned Crumb, I mean, I grew up like I loving indie comics. When I was a little kid, there's a little comic book shop. I can't even remember the name in the Pike Place Market, downtown Seattle.
Golden
And
Age collectibles.
there you go. There you go. Golden Age Collectibles. And we would go to, my mother would take me once a month and we'd go to the comic book shop in Pike Place Market. She would hit the market and then we'd go to the Soto district to watch my and Kinokuniya. I like to
Mhm.
get fortune cookies when I was a little kid. And I was the kid that I never bought superhero comics, was never into them. My brothers had them. My older brothers had them around and stuff. I was buying the Fabulous Freak Brothers when I was, you know, 8.
Yeah,
I didn't know what was going on in them.
of
I
course
didn't know.
not.
I couldn't understand, but I just knew that I liked them, you
Yeah,
know? And I think that that's why I kind of gravitated towards like weird, esoteric, like 70s and 60s gekiga manga as a collector as I got older, because the stuff that I grew up on was just, I like the weird and wild.
sure.
And when it comes to manga, same thing.
I mean, it's the natural progression too for me was to always go with the weird and the wild. Eventually, you know, I grew up reading superhero stuff, but you know, Crumb or a guy like even Jack Davis or some of the EC guys, eventually I knew who they were. I just didn't know their names. Like I knew their art and their art style. Uh,
Yeah, I mean, I was when I was 18 on my 18th birthday, I went and got a Coochie Cootie, the Crumb character tattoo on my leg. I mean, that's like the first tattoo I got was, and then the second tattoo I got was the Devilman stripes that he's got that his wings come out of. So you
mhm.
can imagine, like, I was like really into the Japanese anime and manga side, and I was also into the underground comic side. And you know, I watched cartoonist kayfabe to learn about American comics.
Yeah.
because I just don't know enough about American comics. I've been over here for 20 years and just so entrenched in the Japanese manga side of things that
Sure.
I've neglected a lot of American stuff, to be honest.
Well, they are the greatest resource. Period. End of, full stop right there. I mean,
Yeah.
they're the reason why I did this channel too. Was just because I realized I knew so much about comics. I might as well start talking about them. But um, my quest in it started last year, but it is to learn more about manga because it's everywhere. There's influences, you can see it, and then the influences that go back. I've been reading a lot of Carl Barks, and I started reading Dragon Ball last year, and it's clear that Toriyama and Carl Barks were cut from the same tree. They're
Mhm.
two storytellers that are telling these beautifully paced stories. And I know Dragon Ball's old and maybe more of a kids thing, but as an introduction to manga, it's a fantastic way to start.
Yeah, yeah, and like a lot of the big IPs and the big titles, like Dragon Ball, like Berserk, like
Mhm.
these like big franchises, they got that way for a reason.
Yeah.
It's because the storytelling is good, because the art is amazing. Like
Yeah.
they didn't get there just because because they're easy to consume. I mean,
Yeah.
Berserk isn't easy to consume, but it's hella popular here and worldwide.
Worldwide. Yeah, it is. It's wild to see those tomes just sitting on the shelf and they just keep going and going and going.
Oh, I
Um,
know, I know. Up to 42 now, 42 volumes now that we have now that they restarted.
okay. That's a lot. So you moved there 20 years ago. When did you before you even started the business, when did you just kind of hunt books for fun? Was that something that you got into pretty quickly?
Well, like I always kind of read manga. Manga is it's like everywhere. So you go to
Yeah.
the ramen shop, they have like little manga under the table. So you pull something out and you read a little baki while you're eating your ramen or something like that. And
Mhm.
also for learning Japanese, for Japanese study, I would read manga, and then as my Japanese got better and better, then I was able to read faster and faster and read more complicated stories.
Sure.
And yeah, and then I would say it was probably around 10 years ago that I started to really collect,
Mhm.
like as a quote unquote collector.
Yeah, yeah.
And then you know, I get through series, and then I have American friends too that we would, chat online about like stuff. And then they
Mhm.
would ask me to get stuff for them. And then a few years ago, I was getting maybe for four or five friends, they would ask me to hunt down manga for them or books for them, and I get some stuff for them. And then a couple years back, I was, Johnny Ryan.
Yeah.
Johnny Ryan would harass me monthly to get him these stacks of books. And I had a couple other friends that I was getting stacks of books for, and I
Mhm.
thought, what, maybe I can turn this into like a little side business.
Sure.
My day job was checking translations for a patent law firm. Nothing like really, just
Basic.
yeah, just a regular salaryman job. And I
Mhm.
was like, well, on the side, I could sell a few books here and there, and took off. Just took
Yeah.
off. Yeah. So it
And that
went from collecting to hunting for friends to hunting for all of you.
yeah. Well, you really are doing a service for everybody. I mean, it's amazing to see just watching from the sidelines how it's grown, but uh, your new space, which you're in right now, that's what, maybe 4 months old?
4 months. Yeah, we're probably right around the 4 month mark. I actually set up my like website, got a
Mhm.
business license and everything in May of 2022.
Wow.
So it was only about a year and a half ago. And I went from my home office, and then I rented an apartment around the corner from my house, then over here into the shop that we're in now. And it's been amazing how fast things have grown, to be
Yeah.
honest.
Yeah, the words getting around, and you're gonna soon be the new empire of manga out there.
Well, like we have Mandarake, and Mandarake is great. I have friends that work at Mandarake, so I have nothing bad to say about them. but it's hard to find stuff there
Hmm.
because everything's, in Japan, everything's sealed. So you go
Yeah.
into a shop, the only way to, if you're looking for a new title or something like new, you just have to judge everything based off the cover.
Right.
So unless you already know about it, of course.
Hmm.
And I also I like to find stuff that's a little bit weirder and a little bit more wild or a little bit rare or hard to
Off the
find.
cuff. Yeah.
So I thought, I try to set up something that was similar to a mandarake, but a little bit different.
Sure. Sure. And I imagine if I were to walk in there and say, you have this, this, and this, or can you recommend me this, this, and this? Everything that's in there, so it's curated. That's the
Yes,
beautiful thing about it. And
that's
that's
the
what
thing. I
you do.
consider myself a curator at the end of the day.
Well, and that's, I mean, as what I do, I mean, obviously American comics are different. You got your keys, your first appearances, there's obviously the whole graded thing, but you don't just come across a Fantastic Four #1 and you don't just sell it to anybody. You're talking about a down payment on a house type money. But I try to at least, I know my customers just like yours. And it's like what I spoke to you is like I'm looking for McFarlane stuff from Japan. And I have people that buy, certain artists from me that I always know, like I'm always going to pick up Bernie Wrightson stuff because it's
Mm.
Bernie Wrightson and everybody is into Bernie Wrightson. And if they're not, it's kind of like what you do. It's like I talk about it or you talk about somebody and you're like, oh, I really like this. People listen to you because they watch your channel, whatever it is, and they're like, yeah, this is really dope. It kind of brings me to I'm assuming the answer in this is Otomo, but who do you sell the most of? Like manga
Uh,
wise?
it's probably a tie between Otomo and Go Nagai.
Okay.
Both, of course, everyone loves Nagai stuff, everyone loves Otomo stuff. But I don't know, I try to push manga artists that kind of fly under the radar
Hmm.
that people don't know so much about, like the Kakizaki Kazumis or the Kano Seisakus, or these guys from the 70s and 80s and 90s that really didn't get a lot of shine, like
Hmm.
Otomo or like Go Nagai
Right.
did.
Right.
And I found that once I do showcase those and show them to people, that people get stoked, and then I end up selling more of them, like even more than Otomo sometimes.
Wow. Yeah. And obviously Otomo is one of those names that around the world it's known. Everybody knows who he is, or at least they know Akira. But I'm still fascinated by the stuff that you've found of his, and obviously the complete works books. I mean, if it wasn't for kayfabe and you, I wouldn't know about him, and now I'm scared because I want to own all of them.
Yeah, I think I calculated it once. Like when the complete work series is finished, I will have spent around $2,200 on all of them.
My gosh,
Because-
still,
yeah,
it's amazing.
yeah. But it is great that they're doing that series, because a lot of those, like A Gun Report and some of the earlier stuff, you'll just never find. They were
Yeah.
released in magazine only. They were never in tankobon format. So if you want those stories, you got to get them in the complete works, or you got to go hunt down the original magazines. And magazine hunting is that's a whole thing here.
So for the viewers here that because I'm not a manga focused channel, but I am very interested in it. Can you explain a little bit on the formats and the magazine formats and like what makes them so difficult? I mean, I kind of have an inkling, but love to hear from you on it.
Well, the main thing with the magazines is they're meant to be read and thrown away.
Hmm.
So, and that's the same reason why Shonen Jump comes out. It's produced in Hokkaido, printed in Hokkaido.
Hmm.
So they get it on Sunday night. We get it in Monday morning around 4 a.m., 3 a.m. So it's there fresh Monday morning for the salarymen when they're going to work.
Okay.
The next Sunday night when they come, if there's any copies left, they take them off the shelf, they shred them, they recycle them for the next batch.
Okay.
And then most of the readers who are reading these magazines, they leave them on the train, they throw them in the garbage, they recycle them on Wednesday nights in my neighborhood, like I was saying. So when it comes to 30-year-old magazines, first appearance of Berserk or first appearance of by Miura, then they get hard to find. They get really
Okay.
hard to find.
Makes
And then
sense.
everything's serialized first in the magazines, And then after they get about 12 chapters, then they get a tankobon release. And the tankobon is, one of these.
The thick boys, yeah.
Yeah.
The small.
Just there's some Ricky O for you. When you, of course, everything's shrunken down because everything's produced for the larger, magazine format. So it's the old magazine Shonen. This has the first appearance of Boy Who Has Colt 45 by Kaze Shinobu.
Okay,
so
I know that.
Ryu, the strongest man on the face of the planet, and Violence and Peace, which were showcased in Epic and Heavy Metal magazine. And once everything after that, it gets a tankobon format, and then later on down the road, if it's a successful manga, you might get it printed later on in something like a larger format like this.
Okay, a little bit better paper.
Yeah, a little bit better paper, a little bit bigger. We don't really have a culture of like deluxe editions like Viz puts out.
Right.
These hardcover like Berserk sets, the beautiful spines. There's no culture of that here. So Japan's too tight on space. Manga's meant to be read and discarded. And we just don't really get those big tomes,
Yeah, we're a little spoiled here with that. With the talking about the magazine format, Young Magazine, right? That's where Akira first premieres.
Yes.
In the spectrum of, like Grail type books, like things that everybody wants to own, how hard is one of those to find? The first Akira in Young Magazine.
First one is so hard to find these days. I mean, Mandarake gets them once in a while. Recently, I think that when they do get them, they've been putting them up at the Mandarake auctions, just not straight up on their website.
Yeah.
Because they're getting so rare. The last one that I bought and sold right up the road, Sankakuyama bookstore, my neighborhood bookstore. I was ordering a pizza for the kids. I take out. So I had 15 minutes to kill, went over to talk to the nice lady at the bookstore. I walked in, I saw something yellow in the corner of my eye behind the counter. Instantly knew what it was. It was the first appearance of Akira just sitting up there. She was about ready to close. I had to go pick up the pizza. I said, is that? She said, yes. I said, you open at noon tomorrow? She said, yes. I said, don't let that thing move. And I was there at noon the next day with a handful of cash to pick it up, but it's rare. It is. Yeah. It's not one of those things you're going to find in a bargain bin at an old bookstore. Just people know too well,
Well, and that's one of the things that I face. I mean, I go a lot of places. I mean, in flea markets, garage sales, bookstores, wherever I think that there might be comics, but I'm always looking for the TMNT one or the Caliber Presents #1 with the first appearance of the Crow, the things that most people might miss. That is such a huge book, because Amazing Fantasy 15, the first Spider-Man, nobody's going to mistake that for something else. But it's interesting to me because, like, I think about in terms of, if I was hunting books in another country, I'm looking for the stuff that would be found in, like a Young Magazine, or I forget what the first Dragon Ball is, but I know that's a big book too. But do you hunt in that regard too? Do you look for, like, I know you've got the Terminator eyes, right? You see something, you know exactly what it is. How often do you come across something from a big creator or a big property that you didn't know existed?
I run into stuff now and then. I just picked up an Animal House. Animal House was a short-lived magazine, and that's where Miura, who did Berserk, Miura Kentaro, was first published. And they're rare and pretty expensive. And I just grabbed one because I knew that they're hard to find.
Yeah.
And then I got home and I was like, oh, this is the first appearance of King. Well, in English would be Kingdom. It was his release prior to Berserk.
Oh.
So, and it was the first appearance. And I just got it home and I was looking through it and I was like, wait a second, this is the first appearance, so surprise myself. So once in a while I get lucky like that, but a lot of times I'm on a mission.
Yeah.
I know what I'm looking for. I have a plan and I'm out there digging for those specific things. Because a lot of the bookstores that I go to also, they specialize in certain things.
Hmm.
So they specialize either in photo books or adult books or old manga or newer manga.
Yeah.
And so when I'm out at the shops and I choose a station to go to or an area to go to, I also have to have a plan of like, what am I searching for? You
Yeah.
know, so today it's going to be gekiga day where I want 1970s and 80s manga. Or today is going to be magazine day where I want to try to find first appearances or rare magazine
Yeah.
appearance. So
Um, how do you so here looking for collections and looking for books, you got Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist, offer. How do you, like, without divulging any of your secrets that you don't want to divulge, how do you research? How do you find what's coming out, what exists, where to go, or is it just kind of trial and error, just checking out every shop?
well, it's it's kind of a tough one. By author, of course.
Hmm.
So you'll have someone like, for example, Koike. Koike did was the writer for Lone Wolf and Cub.
Yeah.
So of course everyone knows Lone Wolf and Cub, but he was also a writer for many other mangaka. So and he did like numerous series of writing. So once I realized that Koike wrote for other mangaka like other than Ikigami,
Yeah.
then I wanted all of it. So then that's kind of how I branched out a little bit. And then
Hmm.
from there, then there's a lot of overlap between those guys from the same era. So then I'll go on Japanese Wikipedia, look up who their assistants were or who they assisted for, and think, well, if they did this and I love this, then I'll probably like that too. And then I'll start tracking down that mangaka. And then it just turns into this whole vicious cycle of me trying to get
Everything.
everything I can. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
often talk about that with whoever I'm talking to on the channel, whether it's a creator or shop owner or collector or whatever. It's so interesting. Like, the best way to enhance your experience with comics even goes with music and movies. See what inspired or who these people worked with, or what producers produced this album, what else they produced, or what penciler worked with what writer. And it's such a great way to enrich the collecting and the reading experience, is just to go back and see who influenced who, and who worked with who. So I love hearing that as way that you collect.
Yeah, it's a great way. And maybe another way I do it is I really got into like kind of a certain era. So I
Hmm.
really like late 70s stuff. I feel like I
Sure.
should have been a teen in the late 70s or something. I was born 10 years too late. But so then if you think about Japan, how much manga is released every year, you have 60,000 titles every year.
Oh my
So
god.
just if I just think of a year like 1978, I like this year. Then I
Yeah.
start looking around just for everything that's around that era. Start Googling and looking on Mercari or wherever.
Hmm.
Just start putting in magazine titles, 1978,
Oh wow.
looking through who's was on the cover of those years, and then trying to find people that I don't know about that look
Yeah.
interesting, and then research them, and then pick something up. And if I like it, then I dive in.
So with shonen, it's weekly, right? It
Yeah,
originally was weekly, so
yeah,
50,
yeah, shonen.
52 issues a year, right?
Yeah, so there's a lot to dig through.
Yeah.
And yet
Wow.
it's so many. I mean, over the years, there's been so many manga magazines that were either monthlies or bi-monthlies or weeklies
Hmm.
that just didn't survive. They
Yeah.
lasted for a year, 2 years, and then went under. And those are usually great resources because in the beginning, when they're first starting out, they'll pull together all these great mangaka
Yeah,
because they
yeah.
have a great idea to make this great magazine. And everyone's got their best stories and they put them together. And then a couple years later, maybe they go under, but there's some amazing art in them.
Right. I remember. I got to imagine there's a lot of money that goes into producing a weekly magazine. When you go from production to paying, all of the people that work on it. So it's got to be really profitable from the start. Otherwise, it's probably destined to fail. Um, so do you ever buy full collections from other collectors? Is that a thing that you come across a lot, or not at all?
I do. I actually bought a collection of 800, mostly horror, some magazines like Lemon People, semi lolicon. But it was in the collection. It was a collection of 800 manga that I bought from a neighbor here in
Wow.
Gwenji that was downsizing his studio, and he wanted to make space. And in the process, I also got some original art from him, some
Nice.
Kago Shintaro stuff, some Daisuke Ichiba. Yeah, he had an amazing collection. Ricky, hey Ricky, what's up? You're out there, but yeah, he wanted to downsize, so I did that. I go to a lot of book fairs or
Yeah.
pop-up book events, and I've made friends with the people that run them. So a lot of these pop-up book events, they'll have like 5 or 6 or 7 booksellers that will come together in one rental space, and then they'll sell over the weekend. And
That's
they'll
really
do
cool.
Yeah, and they'll do it once a month. And I go to them all the time. So I've made friends with some of the booksellers. And there's a couple guys where they've had collections of stuff. And I've asked them if they just like to sell it all to me.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we bargain out a deal. And I found it could be anything from like a run of adult magazines to what was the one I got recently? The 1958 Superman.
Wow.
They're the Kashihon of the rental manga era, but the Japanese release of Superman on like just amazing little hardcovers, and I found almost a whole run. It was missing like 3 volumes out of 13. So, and found that from a seller. I mean,
how far back does it go, manga? I mean, are there ages kind of like in American comics where it's, gold and silver, bronze, like, and there's like period points where one era ends, or is it just kind of like the publications are kind of the history?
I think it kind of went in. I mean, I'm not a manga historian. Maybe Ryan Holmberg would be a person to ask a lot of these questions too. But it kind of went from, magazine and newspaper, little, comics to Tezuka borrowing from Disney, copying the Disney stuff and piecing it into what I kind of feel like that Kashihon era when we had rental books from the late 50s to the mid 60s was kind of the beginning of manga in this kind of format.
Right.
They had rental bookshops. You pay 20 yen, 30 yen. You get to borrow a book for 3 days. You bring it back. And it's a great business model for the time because post Japan, people didn't have money to buy books. And people didn't have space to store books.
Right.
So I think that's really where the birth of the tankobon manga came from. Before that, you were more like just short, 2 pages, 1 page, a few strips in, other publications, magazine and newspapers.
And obviously Japanese culture, a lot of this, the super horny, I mean, overly horny Japanese stuff is amazing to me. I don't know a ton about it, but every time I watch you show off something or I'm reading something, I'm just like, even Dragon Ball. Dragon Ball's like the horniest comic I've ever read in my life. And that's just the tip of the iceberg.
And that's for kids.
Yeah, I know.
Not even the stuff for adults. Yeah, so you get out of that like mid 60s when everything went from rental to just for sale books and the growth of Japan. Then progressively between like 65 to I'd say 1979, 1980, manga got more extreme.
Sure.
And when you got into the mid 70s, people were like really pushing the envelope to just make real stories. And then, that's what, so gekiga means real stories or real pictures. Ga means picture and geki kind of means like a story or a play or something like that. But what it really means is like real stories of kind of real people.
Yeah.
And then by the time you got to the late 70s, you have people like Ishii Takashi doing just extremely hardcore, like gangster, sexy gangster, little bit of assault of
Yeah, there's a
the
lot of
worst
that in
kind.
this
I mean,
book.
they get wild. They get really
Mhm.
wild by the late 70s. And then I feel like around 80, when you have the bubbles era starting to emerge in Japan,
Yeah.
then everything got like cleaner and more pristine and shiny because you're in the middle of the Japanese boom. You
Yeah.
know, the Nakatomi Plaza era, we could say.
Is that really what you guys say? Because that's
No, no,
hilarious.
that's what I say. It is that kind of image of the,
Sure.
the Japan owning everything and Japan
Yeah, very
economy.
smooth and slick.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Whereas in the 70s, everything was rough,
Yeah.
rough.
I wonder if it mirrors New York a little bit, except Japan got a little bit smoother before New York did, but New York and Japan in the 70s, not happy places.
Yeah,
Mhm.
rough, rough. And and it was also like a reflection of the culture at the time. You had the
Sure.
student movements. In America, I think you'd probably go back to like the 60s,
Yeah.
like the peace
The
movements in the 60s. In
Mhm.
Japan, you go back to the early 70s of the Ampo riots and the student movements and the worker movements. And people were not happy with the government and people wanted change. And the manga of the time reflects that.
Yeah, yeah, and that's like you said, the '60s and the counterculture movement and what was going on in San Francisco produced some of the greatest comics and obviously the greatest artists of all time. So it's nice mirroring. That's one thing I was curious about. I kind of think back to just the idea, not the actual truth to it, but the movie Lost in Translation, Bill Murray doing the whiskey ads, and there are a lot of celebrities that do ads in Japan. Are there any American artists that have done Japanese comics that have never been released in America? It's just like purely there. Is that ever a thing?
God, it's really not. It's just really not. And we don't have my friend Juan Albaran, he's
Yeah.
doing Mataki Gunner.
Hmm.
At the moment, he's the only foreigner that I know producing manga in Japan. Well, I'm sure that there's some assistants and there's some people out there doing color. And I've met people here in Japan, they're like, oh yeah, I worked for a studio and did this and did that. But as far as like being one of like the head either artists or writers for something, God, it's so Japanese centric, you
Yeah.
know?
Felipe Smith's the only one that comes to mind if somebody
Yeah,
asked. Can
yeah,
you
yeah,
um do you see that stuff often? His was it Peepochu and was it Death Metal Cop or something like that?
yeah, yeah. I actually don't. I don't.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's tough stuff to track down.
I mean, I don't see it often. And God, like sometimes what gets picked up over in the States, of course, because Felipe's like not Japanese, right?
Right.
Like what gets like people talk about in the States or in Europe or other countries is usually not what's popular here.
Makes sense. Makes
Yeah.
sense. You know. That being said, the manga explosion, in this country is it's great to see. I mean, I know a lot it scares the crap out of a lot of comic store owners, but it's just old school trying not to embrace the, not even the new school, it's just the different school. Um, but do you with your business and obviously somebody like me, I bought some stuff from you because kayfabe was like, you should check out Japan Book Hunter. I'm like, yeah, okay, done. But how much of your business is over in this country or in other countries outside of Japan?
So almost 99% of my business is outside of Japan. I do get some Japanese collectors that hit me up. Probably not because they don't have access, because if they're in Japan, they have access to the same things that I have access to. It's
Yeah,
just they don't know how to find it,
sure.
you know. So sometimes I'll sell to Japanese customers, but I'd say 70% of my business is North America.
Hmm.
The other 30% is Europe, Australia, South America,
Yeah,
Chile, Argentina, Brazil. They have a burgeoning desire for Softby and manga, and they're really growing in that regards as far as consumers go.
sure.
And just unfortunately, it's expensive to ship to South America, and shipping is
Yeah.
always a bottleneck for everything here.
Yeah, I mean, I watched, your packages during the Christmas season, and I was just like, "Yep, I know what that's like." Going shipping out 40 boxes in one day, and then 30 the next day. But I imagine you will attest to this. It's you're doing what you love, so it's really not that much work.
Yeah, I mean, packing is the whole thing. I've got it down to a science.
Hmm.
Protect the corners, keep everything floating. Like
Yeah.
I know how to pack a book like better than anything else. But really, shipping and packing is. I mean, people probably imagine that I'm just chilling out here reading awesome Ijima Shiro manga all day long, but the reality is I spend most of my time either out at shops hunting for books or in my office packing books. So it's a pretty blue collar existence at the end of the day, to be honest.
Amen to that, man. That's literally what I do. I'm like either prepping for my live sale, shipping books, out looking for books, or editing and shooting video. Those are the only things I do now. That's it.
Yeah. But it's fun. I mean, it's like my goal in the beginning was to try to get weird and rare manga, obscure mangaka out to people that wouldn't know about them otherwise.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like everyone knows about Gonagai, everyone knows about Otomo,
Mm-hmm.
but do they know about Bonten Taro, the famous tattoo artist that helped start the gekiga movement in Japan? Like they probably don't, but they should.
Was he the one that you mentioned in one of your videos that because he's a tattoo artist, it was Yakuza stuff that he was tattooing when yep. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. He was a hard man. So he was a fighter pilot
Mm-hmm.
in World War II, flew at zero, only one from his squad to survive, and then went on to become a tattoo artist. Of course, he was, affiliated with all of those guys.
Yeah.
Sorry, this is the gesture in Japan for Yakuza.
I figured as much.
So, and then he started making manga as well.
Mm-hmm.
When Muhammad Ali fought Antonio in a wrestling boxing match, he designed his robe.
Oh, wow.
So Muhammad Ali came out in Bon Tentaro's robe, which was all kind of tattoo style and stuff. And he looked gangster stuff, man. Yeah. So, and he was a big influence on that whole 1970s gekiga movement into making more realistic and wild stories, of gangs and badass ladies and stuff.
So for even for myself, because I am a very amateurish manga person, what would you like? How would you suggest? I'm hoping that some people watching this on my channel become your customers. Where do you start? Where do you start? Like how would you tell somebody like, okay, would you say like, what do you like in a storytelling or what do you like in an artist and suggest going forward in manga?
Yeah, that's a difficult question because it really is up to each person's taste. I mean, I sell a little bit of everything. I don't sell a lot of newer manga just because of the fact that it's easy to find.
Sure.
I mean, I'm trying to sell rare, hard to find stuff. So a lot of my stuff is vintage, but there is new stuff that is great. Like I was at the Fist of the North Star exhibition and I bought every catalog, as many catalogs as I could carry. You know what I mean? They're just amazing. So, one thing I would say is just go over to my shop, japanbookhunter.com, and hit whatever, because I have it organized by manga, art books, manga magazines, kind of browse through. And then when you see something that you like, then just kind of maybe click through the tags a little bit.
Yeah.
And you'll find adjacent stuff that's similar. And one thing I do try to do is just communicate with everyone.
Yeah.
If somebody likes something like Goblin Moriguchi and that's what they're into, then I can recommend other stuff that's similar.
Right. And yeah, I wouldn't know where to start, except I did. I went on your site and I did exactly that. I typed in a couple of things, I mean, unfortunately, all the things that I really wanted of the mangaka that I knew all sold out, but I'm like, okay, at least I know what you're going to have available going forward because you're going to try and get everything. I'm assuming, like I know that Kaba book, I feel like you've probably had 100 of them at this point.
Yeah, I mean, the kabas are hard to find these days, but I've probably sold 20 kaba
Yeah.
in my time. I've probably sold 8 of the oversized deluxe edition Domu,
Yeah.
which are hard to find. Kaba 2, probably a handful of those as well. You know, it really is just getting out there and just trying to find them, track them down and find them, you know. So restocking in this business, restocking is hard.
I know.
When you're dealing with rare books.
Yeah. Same here. You know, I've sold I've sold one giant size X-Men #1. I have another, but you don't exactly just find those everywhere. You know, people usually hoard those because it's a first appearance of an X-Men team. But you know, you do what you can to try and hook up the people that are, you know, coming back. There was one book. I mean, I can't. Oh, you're gonna know his name. He's the movie poster guy. And you showcased a couple of his books off.
Noriyoshi Orai.
Yes,
he did the Empire Strikes Back cover, movie poster, some Godzilla.
Yeah, I didn't know who he was. I watched one of the YouTube videos where he went through that book, and I'm like, okay, I need to own this book next time Sean has it. You know?
Yeah, Orai is amazing. He also did 91 covers of SF Sci-Fi magazine, SF magazine here. So he did a whole run of those and compiled them into a book called Myth and Beauties, or Beauties of Myth of Beauties, something like that.
Something like that. Okay.
Beautiful book. But yeah, he's most famous for his movie posters.
Sure. I looked at his art and I was like, oh, so he's, you know, a Frank Frazetta of Japan or something like that. You know, that's how my brain goes. It's like you compare it to something that you already know, and then that sits in your brain.
I actually probably have something. If you look at the old
oh, look at that. Some Vampirella.
Yeah, so
No, you're good. Yeah, you're good.
So these were they put out 2 of them. And these were just special releases by Starlog Magazine. Starlog Magazine was a sci-fi magazine, and Orai consistently did covers for Starlog Magazine. So in this Vampirella, it's not just Vampirella, it's also got other comics by American artists, but it also mixes in some Japanese artists in there too, and Orai is in here as well.
Okay.
So he is kind of the Frank Frazetta of Japan.
Yeah, that's the thing. Sometimes I don't know. That's just how my brain works. It's like I see something and I draw a comparison to it so that it stays with me. And that's, you know, some people are like, oh no, he's swiping them. No, it's like people get influenced by the same things, you know. So one of the other things that you do and you highlight on your channel that I love watching, you go to a lot of art shows. And it seems they're pretty bountiful. There's tons of them, or at least they happen frequently in Tokyo.
Yeah, it seems like there's always a major exhibition going on. I mean, we had Fist of the North Star this last year. There's been a lot of Junji Ito pop-ups going on. The guy has been pushing his 50-year anniversary as an artist for the last year, so he's been doing a lot of exhibitions. But then you have like a lot of smaller exhibitions. Just across the street from my house up the road, we have a little gallery that I met Hajime Sorayama there, Rock and Jelly Bean there, Katsuya Terada, all in 1 week.
Wow.
And like it was just amazing to meet those people, because they're legends here in Japan, and to be able to meet them in person. And that's one thing, is when the art show scene here is very accessible.
Yeah.
So the artists are usually there opening and closing, so you have an opportunity to get stuff signed or to meet the artist in person. And then that's one way I get original art, is from the shows. So for example, I have a Suehiro Maduro piece right over here.
I can see it in the corner.
And I got it from from an exhibition that he did here. And then they had a special sign-up lottery to meet him in person.
That's
and
cool.
Come back, and I got lucky and I was able to meet him in person and come back. And it's like really artists are really accessible over here. And one thing I figured out in this business of book selling and a little bit of art collecting these days is just contacting the artists directly. Because I do speak Japanese, and because I do read and type Japanese, then I can reach out to artists and I can ask them if they have any, Genga original art or signed books sitting around. And sometimes I'm lucky and I'm able to just score directly from the artists.
And that's kind of like what I was talking about earlier is there's so much comics culture in Japan. Like you get comics artists doing gallery showings. You would never see that here in the US, maybe once or twice or some of the bigger names, but it just really doesn't happen. Fantagraphics were lucky because they will do art shows there. But you're never going to see Robert Crumb do an art show there. We'd be lucky if you ever see a piece of original Klaus art grace the walls of Fantagraphics, although he did do a signing there last year.
Yeah, which I feel is such I don't want to say it's a shame and a waste, but for the artists individually, it's a great way to make money. I mean,
sure.
By holding art shows. And a lot of these a lot of the guys that I'm into that were producing in the 70s and the 80s, they're getting older now, and they're trying to, get some money together for their families before they go. And so now they're doing, they'll do a lot of merch. They'll sell original art. They'll sell original Genga from their stuff because they don't want it just sitting around. Whereas I feel, I'm not too sure how the IP side works and how ownership works, but I feel like there's a lot of stuff sitting around that collectors like me want to buy.
Sure.
That's not being sold. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I totally get that.
In a drawer somewhere,
Could you imagine that? Like just even thumbnail sketches or, pencil sketches or prelims or whatever. I know they work much differently. They work a lot quicker, but yeah, it would be amazing to have access to that. Or I don't know if and I know you've met her and, you obviously know Peach. Peach did an Instagram stream right around Christmas, and it was just her ripping up art while Yo was basically talking, like translating for her, basically saying like she wouldn't want this stuff to go out. She's not proud of this stuff. She goes through and does a winter cleaning every year, and I'm just like, there goes all of this.
No. Yeah. And her art is so amazing, but I do understand. In the one good thing about Peach is they maintain ownership.
Yes,
of their stuff, of her art, of her name, and of her IP. Whereas I think that for a lot of mangaka in Japan that are working for like Shueisha or like these bigger companies, the company owns everything.
Right.
So the publisher owns everything. So they don't even have access to the original art anymore. So that was one thing that Ed and I were talking about when we went to the Fist of the North Star exhibition. It was amazing how much of the original art was retained.
Yeah.
Like
thousands of pages that probably exist.
Yeah, exactly. Considering how much was produced but how much was retained is just amazing.
Yeah.
So I kind of understand, but it would be sad to see.
It's still, it's sad. It's sad to see, but yeah, I get it. With the art shows, like I know you said you have a Shintaro Kago piece, and he did an exhibition and a gallery showing in Portland, and it was last year. I didn't find out about it till it was done. His stuff wasn't too expensive, but is there access to it still? And how much is a painting of his?
I think the last painting that I bought that I sold to actually, should I say Brian Moss?
Moss. Yeah, hell yeah!
He bought the deconstruction of Santa Claus piece from he posted earlier.
He talked about that.
Yeah, and and that was an original painting. It was about the size of a piece of paper.
Sure.
What we call A4, maybe slightly smaller, and it was accessible, around $1,000. I think I paid. Something like that.
I think that's about what they were charging at the Gallery Nucleus. He's going to be in Sacramento like this week or this weekend, but
yeah, I'd seen that. I actually had the pleasure of meeting him in the summertime. My son and I went because he was doing caricatures for Super Chief Gallery, their Tokyo branch, and went over and had him draw a picture of my son with a cat on his head.
That's
I
great.
didn't
That's
want him to draw a
amazing.
picture of my son's head exploding or something like that. I thought that would be just too much for my kid to handle size. Like, yeah, just throw a cat on his head. It's fine. You
He's one
know,
of those guys. His art's something else. I don't know how long is I don't know enough about him. I just remember it was a couple years ago I first saw one of his paintings and I'm like, this is something completely different than anything I've ever seen.
yeah.
But
God, he's got to be about 30 years in now, 30
oh
years in,
wow.
because I
Okay.
still track down. I mean, I have a stack over there. I'm always trying to, rather than his tonkobon, which
Mhm.
are were printed pretty high runs of prints, so they're not that hard to find. I try
Sure.
to find signed books by him or his Dojinshi,
Yeah,
his
yeah,
early
his
Dojinshi. So
self-published.
yeah, his self-published stuff, he did a lot, but they're all like low print runs of a couple hundred, little
Wow.
books. So I'm always trying to find those because they're rare and you know harder to
How
find.
often so for yeah, for people that don't know, Dojinshi is self-published, what we would just call self-published, a zine or whatever here. How how many are there a lot of big mangaka that got their start in that, or is it something that I mean, I'm sure a lot, but are they really tough to find the farther you go back? Are they still obtainable? Older
Um,
Dojinshi.
by the more popular artists like the Kagos or like the Maruos and stuff like that, they're pretty hard to find.
Yeah.
They're pretty hard to find, and Peach as well. Peach, she put out some like little zines and stuff, and they go for a lot of money.
Yeah.
Especially the one she did, the tie-up one she did with Kago Shintaro. I think those go for $500 on eBay.
Oof.
Like that. And I actually talked to Yo about it when I saw him over at Brave and Bold,
Mhm.
and I was like, I get asked about these zines that you guys did with Kago. You have any more of those sitting around? I almost want to convince him to do another print run of them.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I'm a bookseller and I understand about buying and selling rare stuff, but I sometimes feel like, okay, that's way too much money for that.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like it's just way too overpriced, and you're excluding everyone else from the pleasure of owning one by
Mhm.
having the market drive a price of $500 for a zine. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whereas if I could get them to do a reprint, print off 100, then I can
Everyone look
drive
it up.
that price down, right?
Yeah,
Which is
yeah.
something I'd like to do. But because it was a tie up with Kago Shintaro, then it's a whole thing where I have to coordinate between Yo and Peach and Kago. And
Yeah.
it turns out to be a little bit more difficult than I thought it would be.
Well, if you ever convince them and you do a print run of 500 and you need to offload 50 right away, I'll be
There
your
you go.
American connection. I
Yeah.
mean,
I mean,
you
that's
know,
actually one of our big goals for this year is now that I'm all settled in this new space is to deal with and buy from more mangaka and artists directly.
right, and then kind of be distribution in that way of like you said, driving the market price down so more people can own it.
Exactly. So my neighbor and friend Matsuda Koichi, who's an illustrator and a mangaka for Axe magazine here. Axe
Mhm.
magazine it's the kind of subculture indie. You get the Sakabashira Imiris, and you get a lot of like the underground artists in Axe, and
Yeah.
he lives up the road from me, and he even told me, he's like, yeah, I get requests from people on Instagram for my art. I just don't know how to distribute it. I
Yeah,
don't know
yeah.
how to put it out to people. And he's like, so going through me, it makes it easier for him. He doesn't have to think about it. He doesn't have to ship. He can just sell to me directly, and then I throw it up on the website and throw it on Instagram and stuff, and then get it out there for people. So we did that with some original. He did like a limited run of like silkscreen posters of,
Yeah.
I think it was 48 of them that he did, and I got a few from him, and then I got him out to people.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, that's great. You're becoming a rep of sorts without really becoming a rep. And I think I mean, the more you can get creators known and sell their works, like that's really what we do this for. I mean, I could sell anything in the world, right? But I love comics and
Yeah.
I love being the person that says, okay, I'm going to buy your collection. What I don't keep is going to be sold to people that really love this stuff. And, that's the honest truth. With printing, so I did want to ask about this. Let's say Shonen Jump, do they ever do a second printing? No, right? Like
No,
you would never find a first appearance that's a second printing. It would just be in a different format.
no. You might find somebody out there bootlegging
Right.
or selling fakes, but no, do not.
Oh,
They do not. And I think it's just for things like Shonen Jump, especially, or those big
yeah.
manga magazines. It's just scheduling. They are going hard, and that's why you have the famous stories of these mangaka that sleep 4 hours a night,
I know.
never take a break. Some of them die young.
Yeah.
It's probably because of those hard hours and those hard careers.
Yeah. No sleep. Seems like a lot of cigarettes, probably not a lot of nutrition, and always sitting. Yeah, that doesn't lead to a healthy lifestyle, unfortunately.
No, it does not. But yeah, you don't get reprintings of the magazines. You get, of course, the tankobon you do. So the way they do
Sure.
the tankobon is they'll usually do, for example, first edition 10,000 run.
Hmm.
It starts to get low. It seems like it's selling well. Then they'll do a second edition 10,000 more.
Okay.
Third edition 10,000 more. So if you have something like, I don't know, Short Piece or Sayonara Nippon by Otomo, then they've
Mhm.
had 20 print runs or 30 print runs. Whereas something else that's a little bit more esoteric, like Goblin Moriguchi over here, you're only going to get one print run.
Right.
Those. Yeah.
As a collector, and also as a seller, are the second printings and the third printings easily identifiable, and are they worth less money as a like a collector?
In the back of every manga, you have like the information, the date, the publishing date, the publisher, and all that stuff. And it says what edition it is in the back.
Okay.
For the most part, edition doesn't, like first edition isn't really a thing here.
Okay.
So much especially for Japanese collectors. But as far as pricing goes, something like just the regular Domu by Otomo's tankobon, first edition is going to be more expensive than later editions.
Okay.
Even, and then first edition with the OB wrap around it,
right,
more expensive. First edition with the OB wrap and the original price tag, insert. So there's like it looks like a bookmark.
Yeah. There's one I think in the Popcorn magazine. Well, something like that.
Yeah. It could be something like that, or sometimes it's just a little strip of paper that they insert in there. In the first editions, it actually had the Domu girl printed on it, which they usually don't have any design on them. So if you can find it with that, even more expensive.
Yeah.
So, I was gonna say, but we don't have like a grading system here. There's no grading in Japan. So because of that, then when I saw that in America they started doing grading of manga magazines this year, it was a bit of a shock for one, and also it made it harder and harder to find those manga magazines that I'm out there trying to find too.
I know, and I'm unfortunately, it's part of my business. I do have to grade books. I mean, I only grade really, really big books, but that just got an Amazing Spider-Man 14 and a 9.2 First Green Goblin. Book's $25,000 book now. I'm not going to say no. Like you don't leave that kind of money on the table. But as a collector and primarily a seller, I'd rather just sell raw because I want people to look inside. I know you're not going to read a $2,000 book, but you can at least flip through it and enjoy the art. The OBI strip is an interesting thing because I'm a big record collector, but I used to sell records too. And the Japanese OBI strip, Beatles records are some of the easiest things in the world to sell. Do you mess around with records at all?
No, not much, but here, one sec. Just
yeah.
I have the Domu record.
Oh wow. That thing's
and
amazing.
Also there was like there's kind of an OB strip thing that goes across it, right?
Yeah.
And the OB strips are pretty rare because on the OB strip there was a little coupon that you could send in and you could get something. I forget what it was that you can get. Maybe it was like a little illustration or something.
Okay.
And so most people cut the OB.
Yeah.
so that they can send in the thing, right? And because of that, the OB strips are hard to come by, and of
Sure.
course that makes if you have the record with the OB strip. But as far as music collecting goes, I used to work in the music industry here 18 years ago, and I got so burnt out when I was doing that. I did that for a couple years. I worked for an indie record label, and
Yeah.
I was signing jazz. Hip hop was really popular in Japan at the time because of Nujabes
Hmm.
and a couple other artists in Japan. So my job was to sign overseas artists from Europe or America to Japan. And oh God, it was just so much work. Insane hours for very little money. And
Yeah.
then after I got out of that industry, then I pretty much stopped record collecting. But Japan's got one of the biggest record markets on
Oh yeah.
earth. So
Oh yeah.
there's a lot to dig through, but yeah, I'll stick with the books.
Yeah. Yeah. I have friends that tour, and every time they go over to Japan, it's like they come back with two suitcases full of vinyl. And it's like, no thanks. Because
Yeah.
because comics is enough for me. But I still have a big collection. Let me ask you about you talked about a little bit the convention scene there. I mean, I know there's Comic-Ket, there's Tokyo Comic Con, there's uh, uh, Brave and Bold. What I mean, Ed talks about those, and he paints a really interesting picture. But for somebody that's buying like you would to resell, how are they? The
Um,
conventions.
each one's different. Each one's
Mhm.
different. So Brave and Bold was more focused on original art. So I went there, I got some Toshio Maeda, and of course I talked to there's Jeff Darrow was there and
Yeah.
was there, and like so for an event like that, I'm going for signed books,
Hmm.
original art, something like Comedia or Comic-Ket, which are very Dojinshi and self-published heavy. Then I'm going around just trying to find something weird and unusual and rare. It's all rare,
Yeah.
I guess, because it's all self-published, but
Self-published.
something that just really stands out as like
Hmm.
original. And there's a little bit of everything there, but yeah. And then I gotta say, I skipped Comic-Con this year, Tokyo Comic-Con this year, because it's just when I went the previous year, it was
Hmm.
so Marvel DC heavy.
Yeah.
There's almost no books,
Mm.
um, very limited amount of original art, and it's just not the same as like a Comic-Con in America.
Sure.
So I decided to opt out this year, and I just didn't even bother going, to be honest.
Well,
But I heard that there were more booths this year than there were previous years. So who knows? It might be better next year.
and that's a growing problem in the States too. We do have a lot of Comic Cons that are still comic heavy. Obviously in the East Coast, everybody talks about Heroes and Baltimore Comic Con. Out here, there's a couple local ones, one in Puyallup, and Rose City Comic Con's somewhat comic heavy. But yeah, it's a shame. I mean, I used to go when I was a kid to the Javits Center in New York, and it was no movies because there were no movies being made at that time. Uh, so hopefully it does bounce back, especially with the strike last year. I think it showed in this country that comics are
Mhm.
still very much wanted at comic book conventions.
Yeah.
you know, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask for my, comic loving audience. Um, Besides stuff like, the popcorn stuff, and this is, 1980, does the Marvel DC stuff get printed pretty heavily over there or even at all?
Not really. Not
Yeah.
really. And I think Jimbocho, which is the used bookstore area of Japan, of
Hmm.
Tokyo, I mean, they have one shop that deals with American comics, and it's a two-floor shop, and
Yeah.
it's only half of the first floor, and everything else around there is manga, Japanese books, like rare books and stuff like that. There just really isn't a market for it here.
Sure.
Whereas Marvel movies,
Different
huge.
story.
I mean, yeah, like everyone, Japanese consumers as well. They go out for the superhero movies and
Yeah.
stuff, but when it comes to comics, they stick with the manga.
Yeah, makes
So
sense. What common sense would say that. But I do, and I want to ask because we already talked about McFarlane. There was a lot of Spawn stuff produced in the 90s in Japan that did not even come over here. Do you run into that stuff at all, or is it just like all in like the garbage at this point?
yeah, we were chatting about that, and I was on the hunt. I was doing a little bit of research online, looking to see what was produced and what was produced here for just here. and what
Yeah.
was imported or
Right.
what was, and it's really hard to tell unless if you're like really deep in as far as the figures and toys go.
Yeah.
I'm talking about figures and toys. As far as the like comics, when they come over here, they're just straight translated.
Right.
You know,
Right.
and you usually don't get any extras. They're just so it's rare that I pick up foreign comics here in Japanese because if I wanted to, I can go on Amazon and buy the English version.
Yeah.
You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And just like, you know, I'm of course a native speaker of English, so you know, without having to struggle.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
I'm sorry.
no, but yeah, like it's the thing that I was finding when I was looking at the Spawn merch, because of course
Yeah.
Todd McFarlane's famous for his merchandising,
Yeah.
was discerning what was made for Japan only or what was maybe molded in America, made in America, and then exported to Japan, and they just changed the card.
Sure.
Japanese card, you know, and it's hard to tell. So I don't know really what's already been released or what's Japan only specific.
There was definitely a trading card set that was Japan only that never made it here. And then they did the comics, but they were just in a different format. And I'm fascinated. And then there was the Spawn manga, which I have, I think the first 2 volumes, which I think is pretty unique because, you know, it was an official thing. It wasn't, you know, Dojinshi or anything. So it's always interesting. Like obviously the Spider-Man manga, which I think you still have available that set on your website.
I should have a set around. I have one set of the 9 tankobon.
Yeah.
No, 8 tankobon set, but the Sun White edition, the 5 wider ones, those just disappear. Every time I get one, it disappears instantly because that's the one that with the opening, the wild opening.
Yes,
so
yes.
The wild opening.
I want to get those at some point. And you know, it's just a little bit of it's weird. It's really weird.
Yeah. I mean, it's not even Peter Parker. You know?
Yeah.
Cool.
So I wanted to ask you about, you know, one of the big things that you hear about here is the horror manga, I guess, shoujo horror. And is it one of the bigger kind of genres these days that's kind of everywhere? It seems that it is. Maybe it's just because Ito, you know, Junji Ito has gotten so wildly popular that it's kind of, you know, it's elevated everything else around it.
Yeah, and Junji Ito's always been popular here, but you know, he's published in Nemuki magazine, which is a monthly manga magazine, not a weekly.
Okay.
He's not in every issue. Nemuki is not it's widely distributed as far as shops, but if you go to a shop, you'll see a stack of 20 Shonen Jump.
Yeah.
There'll be 1 or 2 Nemukis.
Huh.
So if you think about it like that, it's not like a huge, widely spread genre like the stuff that you get from like the major manga magazines like Shonen Jump. So really the people here that, and of course Junji Ito does events here and they're widely popular, you know, they're popular, but they're popular with a subculture of people. They're not like, it's not a mainstream thing. So I think horror manga in general here is pretty niche, I would say, compared to the whole, you know, world of manga.
Yeah.
Pretty niche.
It
So
seems
you don't see horror in Jump.
Yeah.
You know,
interesting. It seems to be, maybe it's just bigger here, or, you know, I love horror movies. I love everything horror. So maybe I'm just in that echo chamber of people talk about it more often, but it also seems to be, you were doing those flip throughs on the DRACUL, the Dracula books.
Yeah.
And I was fascinated by it because it's like, it's strange. It's fucking really weird.
Yeah, Shinichi Sakamoto, and his attention to detail is amazing. I don't think it was Monben. I think it was Archipel who does a YouTube channel. They do a YouTube channel, and they recently did a speaking and art event, like a 3-day event here in Tokyo.
Yeah,
and they profiled him, Sakamoto, who does DRC, like Dracula. It's basically Bram Stoker's Dracula. And before that, he did Innocence, and which was also a period piece set in Europe, you know, like Victorian Europe. But the process that he goes through is so amazing. He's got a designer, he's got people collecting old Victorian dresses and then making swatches of the designs from the dresses that he can use in his art. You know, it's like the attention to detail is amazing.
I mean, it's what keeps people engaged in a book too. If you know you're looking at something that's super detailed, you're not going to put it down. I mean, it's one of the reasons why I like Wrightson so much. Bernie Wrightson. The detail on his stuff was absolutely insane.
Yeah, yeah. And so I should say there's mainstream horror, which it's like huge print runs, like widely popular, like the Shinichi Sakamoto stuff. But and you can find it in every bookstore that you go to. But as far as the overall culture of like horror manga here in Japan, I'd still say it's pretty niche compared to like the Dragon Balls and compared to
the fighting and the that kind of stuff, and then maybe kaiju manga.
Exactly, seinen stuff is always going to be the most popular, I think, compared to shoujo or like not seinen, shonen, I should say, like young adult, geared towards boys. Right, is going to be more popular than the shoujo stuff that's geared towards girls.
But from what Ed explained in the Dojinshi kind of sphere, it's mostly women creating, right? Or it's a lot of heavy on female creators.
Oh, very heavy. And in Ikebukuro, northern part of Tokyo here, they have a bunch of one area where there's a bunch of dojinshi shops.
Yeah,
I wanted to go out and do some digging because I wanted to find weird dojinshi that were like Marvel, DC, like like homoerotic Deadpool.
Homoerotic Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Exactly. And and then I realized when I was in the shop, for one, I was the oldest person in the shop. Second of all, I was the only man in the shop.
Yeah.
Then I started to feel like a creep. And I was like, yeah, maybe I should get out of here soon. And I looked around, all the staff were women. And so the dojinshi market is very, there's a lot of ladies in that sphere. And it's great. It's great to have all those. My daughter's an aspiring mangaka. She's an aspiring artist. And it's great that there's that space for women.
Yeah, if diversity in comics just brings better stories, but different points of view, that's one of those things that I push back. This channel is very heavily pushing back on the standard fucking male bullshit that we hear in the comics world. And yeah, I want manga. I want comics from different voices because we're all from different backgrounds. We all experience things different ways. Who wants to hear the same thing from the same type of people all the time?
Exactly. And one thing that I would like to see here in Japan is more foreign artists here producing, because it would mix it up a little bit,
Sure.
Yeah.
Just like we've got, Peach is bringing such an interesting voice to the stuff that she's doing in Marvel and the style. And, I'd love to see more of that. Okazaki did that one Star Wars book. Holy shit. It's one of the coolest looking books I've ever seen. So I would love to see more of that. There was something that I did want to ask you, just kind of a personal aside, what's a grail that you've been hunting for a long time that you have still yet to find for, personal collecting?
Oh, geez. So I do collect art books as well as manga, and one is Toshio Saeki. Toshio Saeki is kind of like an Eroguro artist. He produced most of the stuff that he published was in adult magazines and S&M magazines in the 70s, in the early 80s. And if you saw his artwork, you would instantly be like, oh yeah, that's Toshio Saeki. Very distinct. And his original release of Red Book, it's like Akaihon in Japanese, but in English, Red Book, 1973 edition, I've been looking for years. They did a reprint, I think around 98, 2000, around that. And I've owned one of those before, but I want the original 1973. Never found it.
Wow.
But a few of my other holy grails I have found, and I hold on to them for my dear life. You know, like the oversized Domo Deluxe Edition.
Sure.
Keiichi Koike's Spinoza, which he did Heaven's Door, which Last Gasp published
Oh, okay.
2 years ago, maybe.
Okay.
And he's like a psychedelic manga creator. And I think he did all the drugs in the world. That's what I always tell him. His manga is insane. But his first 2 manga were these little hardcovers called Spinoza. And they only have one word in them, Spinoza. And they're all full color, which is pretty rare for Japanese manga. Japanese manga tends to get very little color.
Yeah.
And, those were my holy grails for a while, and I was able to track those down.
That's cool. Yeah, it's nice to like where it pays off. I mean, one of my grails that I picked up last year was a Albedo 2, which is the first Usagi Yojimbo. There's only 2,000, 3,000 copies ever, that were printed of that book, but it was printed in Washington. It was published in Washington, so I found one in a collection.
Oh, jeez. Yeah. So that is one thing, is if you know where it's printed, you kind of know where to look for it, which is like with those old underground comics out of San Francisco, out of Last Gasp in the 60s, then a lot of them didn't make it to Florida.
Yeah.
So it's going to be hard to find them in a short box in Florida, but maybe San Francisco, you'd have better luck.
I see them a lot when I go down there at flea markets, and it's the opposite. Is like Turtles #1 was published in Massachusetts. Not a lot made over the West Coast, so you're not going to find them that often in collections, because the people that bought them, that do have them in collections, they knew exactly that they had the first Turtles book. It wasn't like, oh, that happens to be here.
Even something like these, right behind me, Kasuma Shiro, they've been doing these like reprints of these. And my friend, and they did this in collaboration with Mandarake. My friend over at Mandarake was explaining. So these were all like released in Black Punch magazine. If you look on the back there. Black Punch magazine was a short-lived magazine from the late 60s and early 70s. You cannot find them in Tokyo. I've been looking for years to find one in Tokyo, but they were printed in Hokkaido. So the publishers couldn't find the original art from these. So what they did was they had staff in Hokkaido track down the old magazines. And then they're printed out in Sapporo. So they had people out there in Sapporo just hunting down all of the Black Punch magazines. And then once they got them all, they did high resolution scans. And that's how they came up with these.
That's interesting. It's kind of like what Scott Dunbier does with his artist editions. Instead of hunting down original magazines, he hunts down the original art, scans it, and then makes these beautiful artist editions.
And that hunt is a brutal hunt.
I am sure. Before we get going, I do want to touch on you're gonna have to tell me the name of it, but there was a book that Kayfabe shut off on the channel with the serial killer, the guy that made the manga, and I think he was a cannibal.
Oh yeah, the Kobe Cannibal, which was Sagawa, Manga Sagawa, Issei Sagawa, and he did 2 different manga. One of them is pretty hard to find. The one that was shown off on Kayfabe, that one's pretty hard to find, and I'd found that one for Ed. And then Mandarake in 2000 did another one, a different manga, which I have just right here. I can grab it off the shelf. Called Satin, which is this here.
Okay. Jeez.
And they ended up pulling it from the shelves at some point, and I think it was because of it gives off bad vibes. And because I have friends over there, I talked to one of my friends, and he's like, "Oh yeah, we have a little bit of dead stock." So I bought 10 directly from him via dead stock, and but yeah. And then recently, when Brian Moss was here, he gave me a bootleg that someone in America had produced.
I'd heard about those.
Yeah. And he brought me over a copy of that bootleg. I don't know if it's the best vibes for the place to have it around, but I do have some other weird manga. There was a series of manga put out by the Ohm cult that did the sarin gas bombings, Asahara Shoko, and they would put out manga published by Ohm to recruit people. So it was a recruiting method, you know?
Propaganda, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Well, as cursed books, I mean, I guess that would be a cursed object.
Yeah. I'm actually thinking about selling my collection of weird cult stuff this year just because it kind of doesn't fit in here.
But you are, I mean, it's the same thing. It's like you want to be able to curate that stuff just because there's somebody that might want it. There's a collector out there. I mean, after all, even if it's something that's like that the history of it's pretty nasty, we get rid of it, we might, it's like condemned to repeat history if we don't look at, what happened before.
Exactly. And it does. It's not like what I like grandizing or like flaunt. It's more like just historical pieces of work. There's a lot of manga that I buy from the 70s when the gekiga scene got really hardcore
Mhm.
in the late 70s. There's a lot of mangaka and artists that I collect that I don't particularly like their stories, to be
Sure.
honest. But it's a real important part of the movement of manga during that era where people were pushing the envelope as far as they could push it. And that opened up doors for us to have other kinds of manga that
Sure.
otherwise wouldn't exist. Whereas in America, you had the whole clamp down on the horror and the EC stuff. It was the opposite here.
Yeah.
People got wilder and wilder and wilder and so extreme, and then they pulled it back a little
Yeah.
bit. You know?
Well,
So you don't, yeah.
yeah, and the comics code in America pretty much like stunted the growth of comics for 3 decades. I mean, or maybe even longer. Like, it's still kind of sad when you think about that era of comics just being, clamped down on.
And
And
if you think about things like that comic code, I mean, you would know better than I. Like, it kind of made it so everything is superhero centric.
it did. It was acted like a funnel.
Yeah, because you couldn't really do much else, you know. I mean, you could, and people did. I mean, you do have other indie creators and other people, the
Mhm.
Daniel Clowes, and
Even a guy like Tim Vigil, with
yeah, Tim
Faust.
Vigil. Yeah. God, man, his posts on Instagram are amazing.
He's a wild guy. He is
He's
a
a
wild
wild guy. I think the last comment I said, I was like, dude, you need to hook up and do a tie-up with Toshio Maeda, because who did Usurogi Doji, like
Mhm.
the octopus
Yeah, yeah.
tentacle heavy stuff.
He's the closest. It's funny that I don't think I've ever heard Ed or Jim say this, but he's the closest thing to one of those kind of like mangaka that does that stuff. Vigil. I mean, I have some of the original Faust print sets, and I can't show any of that stuff on YouTube.
Yeah.
It's there's stuff coming out of orifices and going in orifices that's not human.
Not not human. But
Yeah,
yeah, you need wild people out there
sure.
creating the wild stuff so that we can have the wild stuff.
Yeah,
I think
pushing the envelope is important. Is very important.
yeah, it's important for art, it's important for culture. I mean, it's kind of like one of those things like how do you create freedom? Well, you let people be free.
Yeah,
You let people be free to do what they want and make what they want and buy what they want. As far as my books go, the only thing I don't do lolicon, because I don't, I have daughters. I'm
yes,
not into it personally. I don't
sure.
personally dislike or judge anyone who is into it. That's their business. But
Of course.
other than that, I'll sell anything, to be
Yeah,
honest.
me too. I mean, you know, there's no. I think the only thing I don't sell is what's his name, Cyberfrog, Ethan Van Sciver, because I can't give shine to somebody that's a nasty person. But you know, yeah, it's all under the guise of art, and it's important, like you said, pushing the envelope. I mean, you grew up in skate culture. I love punk music. Like, if those guys didn't push the envelope, if Dead Kennedys didn't exist, if the Sex Pistols didn't exist, if the Clash didn't exist, bands like that, music would be boring for the most part.
Exactly. And it's when you get into manga or comics or
Yeah.
anything else, it's the same thing. You have to have those extremes to open up the doors for everything.
Sure, sure. Before we get going, let's talk about the website. Is the Discord and the Patreon? What do we got?
Okay,
What's
okay.
still available?
Well, I'm Japan Book Hunter on all the social medias.
Yes.
We have the website is japanbookhunter.com. That's where I sell my books. I on Instagram is where I post usually kind of like rare books, stuff that's I'm not going to be getting in stock often. So if you want something rare, something that's pretty hard to find, check out the Instagram. They do go pretty quickly.
Yes.
So usually when I post, if it's a hot one, if it's something rare, it's only up there for 30 minutes or so before it gets sold. And then social media, Instagram. Brandon runs the TikTok. I'm too old for TikTok, but he's a 23-year-old, so
yeah.
I let him handle all the TikTok stuff. And yeah, we're going to be pumping out some YouTube videos this year. I wanted to get back into that because I love showcasing, again, mangaka that normally wouldn't be seen by people in the West, showcasing them on the YouTube or on the Instagram to just try to give them a little bit of exposure.
Yeah.
That's the best I could do. Because I buy and sell used books, it's hard for me to support artists directly other than when I buy their original art, right?
Right.
So or if they have a new release out, then I'll go to the bookstore and buy it, to support the artists. But the only other way I can really support them is just to let their name be known.
Yeah. That's a great thing that you do, and I try to do the same. Does the Patreon still exist for you or no?
The Patreon is long gone. I got kicked off Patreon, and when I got kicked off, I said, "Okay, delete my account." I emailed them, and I was like, "Okay, which is amazing because I never hear of people getting kicked off Patreon. Otherwise, Johnny Ryan would not be there."
Yeah. That is, I mean, I've heard you talk about being kicked off of YouTube once also, and it's just like, it's just art. It's not like this dude's on here showing like I don't even know what you would get kicked off of YouTube for, but
I got kicked off of YouTube for Namio Harukawa face-sitting books because he's the femdom stuff,
Yeah.
And I got kicked off of Patreon for Bondage Fairies, which they're, like I said, it's not lolicon because they're not humans. They're fairies. They're not even human. But
you pointed out on multiple videos, you can show somebody getting beheaded 6 different ways, but God forbid there's some sex. Nah, we can't. We can't have it shown.
Things are just so puritanical. And that's one thing about, like in Japan, they have the mosaic, the blur out rules for adult content and for manga. So, but other than that, everything goes, there really isn't a culture. And if you go over to someone's house, if somebody comes into my office, there's no, I have a whole corner over here of adult manga and adult manga magazines, and nobody bats an eye.
Yeah.
Nobody says Sean, you're a weirdo, or Sean, no, everyone's just like, oh yeah, he's got some adult manga.
It exists and he sells it. That's okay. Yeah.
And people just don't judge. I think in other countries it's a little bit more puritanical 100%. Than here.
Yeah. Well, everybody needs to subscribe to the YouTube and just blast through watching all of Sean's old videos and then put comments like, hey, we need more. JapanBookHunter.com. If you don't get it first, somebody else will. That's the rule of that website.
Yes. The hot stuff goes quickly. We try to keep it stocked up. Holiday rush, we sold a lot of stuff over the holiday rush. So we're in restocking mode right now. And I'm excited because this week I'm going to be at the shops all week trying to restock the website. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, dude, this was a pleasure. And I look forward to doing whatever else we can do, more videos in the future. And maybe meet you in person this year. I'm thinking about it. The end of the year, going to Japan. So, I mean, there's only one way to do it.
Welcome to come by the shop, or you're welcome to go on a hunt with me.
Dude, that would be epic because I like learning. And to me, going to Japan, it would be a full-on learning experience, learning about the culture, the art, and the comics, obviously. So,
I'm looking forward to it. Get on over here.
All right. Well, thank you. And all of his links will be down below. There will be no links spared. And keep an eye out for his Instagram because, he's showing off, a couple of things every day, if not more. But Sean, this was a fucking pleasure, man.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, yeah.